All right, good evening, everybody. So my name is Bob Bruner, and I am the exotic forest pest educator with the Department of Entomology at Purdue University. This evening, we're going to be talking a little bit about the spotted lanternfly. You probably heard a little bit about this pest from neighbors or maybe on your local news sources, but I imagine a lot of you haven't quite seen it yet. This insect is a recent arrival in Indiana. It only has a couple of locations where it's established infestations, but unfortunately, we do expect it to spread across our state. Some of you may be forced to deal with this. For example, I live in Terre Haute, and I'm fairly certain that I'm going to have to be working on this pest on my property because it does tend to like to follow railways and other big shipping transports. And I suspect that a lot of you are going to be working with the same. So right now in front of you, you have a great picture of this insect. It has some really obvious features on it. Thankfully, it does make it relatively easy to identify. Now, before I go any further, I do want to say I can't take credit for any of the images that you will see this evening. These were done by a variety of individuals who have been working in the field. If all of these pictures should be credited to them, and if not, I'll make sure to fix that later on as I keep working on this program. So why do we care about the spotted lanternfly? Well, unfortunately, some of you probably already know, but spotted lanternfly is very good at infesting a variety of plants. It is relatively new here, so we're still learning a lot of what it's going to do, though we do know it has a rather large host range. And unfortunately, when infestations get particularly bad, you can walk into a scene that doesn't look very different from this. What you're looking at here is a pretty bad infestation on grape, and they will very readily infest grape arbors and destroy them very quickly too.
No, he mutes the automatic.
Little bit of information on the spotted lanternfly. Let's go to our general information here. All right, they are invasive. So just to give you a definition of what invasive means, an invasive species is a species that is not native to our area or whatever area it's located in, that has no natural controls due to the fact that it is not native. None of the plants, none of the predators recognize it as a food item, so there are no controls over its population growth. And invasive species, with very few exceptions, are almost always accidentally or sometimes intentionally introduced by human beings to their environment. That being said, this particular invasive species is related to a group of insects that also contains aphids, cicadas, stink bugs, tree hoppers, leaf hoppers, a very, very large group of insects that are generally known as Hemiptera. The order is referred to as Hemiptera. Us entomologists like to group things together by order. Now, the trait that makes them all belong to this same group is that all of them have what we call piercing, sucking mouthparts. Sometimes you will hear that referred to as a rostrum, and it is just like a syringe. It can put this rostrum into a plant, or if it's a predator, it can put it into its prey. It will use often digestive enzymes or saliva to break down the tissue therein and then be able to drink it up. In the case of insects like aphids or cicadas and our spotted lanternfly, it uses those chemicals to be able to break through cell walls, to be able to get to the portions of the plant it needs to be able to drain out the nutrition that resides in phloem and xylem. Basically, the plant cell types that will transport nutrients. Now, in the case of spotted lanternfly, it is not very particular. It has a very broad host range, and unfortunately, this means some bad news for us. We would prefer our invaders to have limited host ranges because that makes them much easier to control. But in the case of spotted lanternfly, it can adapt very well in its environment that it's in right now. All right. So the question is, where did they come from and how did they get here? So like a lot of our invaders, they are native to Asia. So we do get a lot of invaders from Asia because many of the areas there have a very similar environment to this one. But what's interesting about spotted lanternfly is that while they're native to Asia, they're not very common over there. And this kind of tells us that in their native range, they probably have a lot of controls that keep their populations in check and keep them from spreading. Those controls don't exist here, which is why they've begun to spread and they're becoming a major problem for a lot of folks, particularly those who are working with grapes, maples, and other plants. We believe that they arrived on imported stone products. So if you look at, here, I'm going to change this to a laser pointer really quick. So if you look at this over here, you can see that this looks like a smear of mud located on a rock. Well, the trouble is that's not actually mud. That is their egg mass. This insect has what we call a cryptic life, where it can hide its egg masses very easily, and it can make it very, very difficult to detect. Now, it was first detected in the United States in 2014 on imported stone. And since then, it has been spreading very, very rapidly. So this is the most up-to-date map that I have right now for the current spread of this insect. Its arrival was originally found in Pennsylvania. And you could see that since then, it has very, very rapidly spread. Any of the counties there that are highlighted in blue, they are ones where there is an established infestation. That means that there's a significant number of spotted lanternfly. They have established host plants that they are living on, and they are reproducing successfully. The little purple dots that you might be able to see in individual counties mean that there have been sightings of spotted lanternflies, but no established infestation. Now, this is actually important because we may begin to see this a lot in Indiana, where you'll have individuals or maybe even a few spotted lanternflies identified, but no actual infestation has started yet. Regardless, when you see these insects or something that you suspect is one of these insects, we still want you to report it to us. I'm going to give you information later on to help you figure out where you can go to report these when you see them. We want to track all this information because that's going to help professionals who work in this field, like people who are part of the DNR and other organizations, to try to eradicate these as quickly and efficiently as possible. Now, this map you're seeing right here, this map I love this map because it tells a very, very good story that we can work with. What it's showing you is that these colors represent the potential for the insect to establish in an area. So for those of you who may be colorblind, what we have here is on the outer edge, a greenish color, a little bit closer in is a yellow, and then a red color right at the center. And as you can see, that red color is spreading right across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and right continuing westward. This means that we are right in the crosshairs. We have the best suitable environment for spotted lanternfly to spread and develop in. There aren't going to be many areas of Indiana that are just going to simply be immune to it. Most of Indiana is going to be a great environment for it, so long as plants are there that they can take advantage of. And since this insect has a very broad host range, you can imagine what's going to happen from there. Now, the big question that I want you all to think about is to ask, how is this thing spreading? How is it actually getting across Indiana? Well, the picture here, they say a picture can say 1,000 words. Well, this one's definitely telling a good story. Spotted lanternflies are kind of lazy. They're not real good flyers. They like to land on things and they'll just kind of hang out there for a long time. Now, obviously, a spotted lanternfly is not going to take a trip on someone's tailpipe. However, they will land on a car and they'll definitely take a trip with you. They can get into things. They're insects. Imagine the cicadas that we see every year. You'll find cicadas bouncing off your house. You'll find them inside of buildings, buzzing their wings. When we had the Brood X emergence a few years ago, we saw those everywhere. Spotted lanternfly is going to have a similar behavior in that they're just going to bounce off of things. They're going to hang out. They're going to buzz their wings, and they're just going to figure out where they can go to be stable. And they're going to spread through that. But not only will they spread as adults, they'll also spread as eggs as well. They'll lay their eggs on a variety of things. What they're doing is that they are hanging out, or arriving, I should say, around areas where there are major points of industries that are associated with shipping routes. That's why you saw that Pennsylvania had a major outbreak and then it was spreading steadily westward, because the insects were just hitching rides on trains and other things and spreading westward from there. What they'll do is, though, like I said, they can grab onto a car or they can lay their egg masses on the side of a vehicle. And the trouble is, their egg masses can often just look like a smear of mud, which means they're very, very difficult to identify and go, hey, I need to get rid of this. Another thing that we need to be aware of as well is that they can also hitch rides on cut plants and firewood. So a lot of you may remember our campaigns a few years ago when emerald ash borer was a much bigger concern than what it is right now, unfortunately. We said, don't move the firewood. I think a lot of organizations are saying that firewood shouldn't be moved more than 30 miles from wherever it's cut. I personally would say, don't move firewood at all. Burn it where you cut it. Use it where you cut it. Unfortunately, a lot of us do have wood burning stoves, so we need to get firewood, especially as the winter comes on. Don't get firewood from outside your county. Stay within the county. Use it where you burn it. Don't bother trying to get it from elsewhere. So this is actually an old map. I'm going to start with that. This is an old map of Pennsylvania's infestation right around 2020. And what I want to demonstrate to you here is what if I take a map of Pennsylvania's highway system and overlay it on the map of its infestation. So I've got the highway system here with the black arrow coming off of it and leading over onto the state itself. So let's go ahead and switch a little bit more and we overlay it over. Well, you can kind of see that the highway system is correlating to spots where they were finding new infestations back in 2020. And this has only gotten worse because, as you could see, if we go back to our newer map, you could see that that infestation spread along their highway systems. One thing that we also need to note too is, where is this in Indiana now, since it is now spreading westward? Well, we could see that there is an infestation in Huntington. That infestation is pretty well established, and it is along a railway. There's also one in Switzerland out in a more rural area. So why don't we take a closer look at those infestations? So this is the Huntington infestation. Vince can obviously tell you more. You feel free to put anything in the chat if you want to, Vince, but there is a significant amount of tree of heaven throughout the Huntington area, and tree of heaven is the primary host for this insect. And you can also note here, the biggest parts of the infestation right here that I've circled also correspond to this line. And what I'm highlighting here is a railroad track. So it doesn't take much to go, oh, hey, I think that these things probably hitched a ride on a train, and then they began to spread through the area. Now, if we take a little bit of a different view here, this is from just further up, a satellite image from it. You can see the infestation, and then there's the railway that it's been following along, just pretty much what I've shown you in the previous image. Now, the other infestation that we have in Indiana is in Switzerland County. And you could see that it's kind of spread throughout a woody area. It's got different locations. I remember hearing Vince and some of the other people in DNR describing their control efforts for it, and that it was in a fairly rural area that was already hard to access, and it's just kind of spreading throughout those areas and taking advantage of whatever trees they can. If I were to guess, and this is just me guessing, this road right here probably transports a lot of farm equipment. And maybe an infestation got on a piece of farm equipment, or maybe there's a lake nearby where somebody was taking like an RV or something, and they just bounced off of that and got into the woods there. Okay, so moving right along, here is the higher up map here. So you can see where that infestation is located right along the state line, I believe. See, Vince is also saying that there is a truck transfer station at the Huntington site. So there's another way it could have gotten into Huntington as well. Thank you for adding that in there. All right, so the part that is going to be the most important for my job as an entomologist is I want to make sure all of you can identify this insect. Thankfully, that is a pretty easy job for me. This insect has some bright colors. It's got some obvious patterns. So it's not one of the more challenging ones that we have to deal with. Let's see. And then Vince is also saying the Switzerland County site was accidentally introduced by an individual that moved to the area from Pennsylvania. So that's how it arrived there. It just hitched a ride on someone who was moving from an area that already had an established infestation. All right, so identification of spotted lanternfly. We have adults with beige wings that have black spots. This is a very solid trait. It won't change much. You will always see that. And that the wings, the forewings now, the wings that are on top when they're folded up, are going to be bisected by a darker area near the tip. So let's take a look at that picture one more time. So these are the forewings right here. And we could see that it's got the little dots all over the wings, and then it's bisected with this darker area at the wing tip. And that trait will be shared by all individuals who are adults. This is an adult spotted lanternfly you're looking at right now. Then we also have bright red hind wings that you could see real clear in the previous image with white patches on them, as well as yellow stripes on the abdomen. Now, the yellow striping on the abdomen may not be immediately obvious when you're looking at it. It tends to get more obvious when the insect begins to develop eggs in its bodies as it's getting ready to lay eggs, and its abdomen will swell up, and that yellow will become brighter and more obvious as its abdomen gets distended with all the eggs it's carrying. Now, it's important to understand, too, that spotted lanternfly's life cycle means that it's going to have different body forms depending on the time of year that we're looking at. Now, right now, we are at this stage, the egg-laying stage. It's almost certainly already completed because it's now gotten really, really cold for them. The only people that are, or the only individuals that are going to be surviving are going to be those that happen to find a warm place. And even then, I'm pretty sure they're all gone by at this point. What they're going to do is during this period of time, they're going to lay eggs that are going to look like this egg mass that's going to resemble a smear of mud. And I'm going to show you some more pictures of that so you can get a better idea of what you're looking for. Now, once the eggs have gone through the winter, they're going to overwinter in that state, and they're going to hatch out in June or April, through April to June. And originally, they're going to hatch into this little black larval, or I shouldn't say larva, nymph. So spotted lanternfly has what we call an incomplete metamorphosis. So they don't hatch out of an egg into a caterpillar. They actually come out of an egg in a form that's going to kind of resemble their adult form. And this little black guy right here is what you're going to look for. He's going to have little black spots on his body, or little white spots on his body. His body will be mostly black. And as he grows, he's going to develop bigger and bigger into this shape right here. And eventually, they'll develop into their final instar, their fourth instar. Now, what this means is that the word instar is a word that we entomologists use to describe the time in between an insect molting. They can't grow like we do because their body's covered in hard exoskeleton. So they molt or shed their exoskeleton so they can grow and get bigger. The first three instars are going to have this black color with white spots. And the final instar, this one, they're going to turn this really, really bright red color with white and dark patterning on it. Now, what's interesting is that the way that we first identified spotted lanternfly in Indiana is that someone put a mention in a picture on Facebook of finding this strange mutant lady beetle. And it turns out it was this spotted lanternfly. It was the larva of the spotted lanternfly. And thankfully, a person who works with invasive species caught the image and shared it with the DNR in Purdue University. Now, they'll go through their fourth instar, right, and they'll begin to hatch out of that right around July. So they'll go ahead and shed their skin one last time until they become their adult form. And that's the form that's going to have wings. So the important thing also to remember too is that the nymphs, they can't fly, their wings aren't developed yet, but you will see their wing pads on their body. Only the adult will be able to fly. The adults, like I said, they're not very good flyers. They aren't going to go real super far. They're not going to be like a honeybee foraging or a fly buzzing through the air. They're just going to kind of buzz wherever they can and kind of smack against things. But that is going to be the life cycle that you can expect with the spotted lanternfly. Now, here's the thing. Spotted lanternfly does have some lookalikes here in Indiana. Now, in terms of the way their body looks like, their body form, they do resemble cicadas a little bit because their wings kind of form a tent or a roof shape over their body when they're at rest. They will have those piercing, sucking mouth parts that fold underneath their body, and they'll rest on trees, just drinking the sap out of trees they have their mouth parts poked into. But their color doesn't really match a cicada much at all. However, you can also see down here, there's this image of a tiger moth, this geometrid. The colors actually do kind of match up to what a spotted lanternfly looks like. But spotted lanternflies, if you touch their wings, or if you happen to see one and you manage to get a hold of their wings somehow, their wings won't come off with a powdery substance, whereas a moth, that will definitely happen. They will also have a lot harder of a body as compared to a moth. Leopard moths, this one right here, are going to look a little bit similar because they have the darker spots on a lighter background, but you could see that the leopard moth spars are kind of open, they're hollow spots with white in the middle of them, doesn't quite match. Ailanthus webworms may resemble a spotted lanternfly a little bit, but they're going to be much, much smaller. They're very small moths, very thin, their wings are very tightly folded over their bodies. Milkweed bugs are one that I suspect that a lot of people are going to confuse for the nymphs of spotted lanternfly. That's okay. Whether you see a milkweed bug or a tiger moth or what have you, I want you to go ahead and report it. Because even if you're wrong, someone eventually is going to be right. Someone will find one, and we need that information. So go ahead and report it. Now, the white-lined sphinx moth you see here, they're going to be pretty big. They're going to be a good-sized moth, but you won't see them at rest in trees as much. You're going to see them flying around a lot more, particularly towards evenings around lights. The color may vaguely resemble, especially in the dark if you can't see it very well, but a sphinx moth should be a little bit bigger, and they're going to be soft-bodied again. They're not going to have the hard buzzing sound that you'll hear with the wings of a spotted lanternfly. But like I said, regardless, go ahead and report it. I will go through all of this, and I know people in DNR and other people at Purdue University will be going through it. We want all of the information you can give us. All right, so I mentioned the early instars of this insect, and I want to give you some better pictures of it. So what you're looking at here, the earlier instars 1 through 3, are going to look like this little guy right here. He's going to be pretty tiny starting out, covered in white spots, and then he'll grow for a while until they reach about the month of July or so. And then they're going to be much, much larger until they are in a form like this bright red with white and black coloration on it. This is our mutant lady beetle. So don't be afraid to take pictures too. You can always put these in the Purdue Plant Doctor, and I'm going to show you that a little bit, or a variety of different apps so you can get these identified and communicated to us. Now, I did promise you I wanted to show you the egg masses of this insect as well. This is where things are going to get a little hairy, as one of my former professors used to say. Can any of you see the egg mass on this tree? Put yes in the chat if you can actually see the egg masses. There's more than one. That, Vince, I hope you do. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of you are picking up on it. Very good. So here is where they are located. Now, the trouble is that I knew where they were, obviously. Vince obviously knows where they are. And some of you may have been eagle-eyed enough to pick them out. But if you just are glancing at it, you may not have noticed these. These are really hard to see. I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago when Vince and I were working on something. He brought in several pieces of Tree of Heaven that had egg masses on them. And yeah, they are incredibly difficult to see unless you are very particularly looking for them. They just look like a smear of mud. They look like, this one looks like dried mud that's cracked. But those are egg masses on what's probably a river birch. Here's another picture of some egg masses. If I were walking by in the woods, I would never have seen this. So I'm going to circle a few of them so you guys can see them. Let's see, this is probably one right here. This right here is probably one, this as well. And then all of these little shapes right here you see, those are the actual eggs, that kind of scaled appearance. Those are the eggs themselves. So that when they lay their egg masses, they're not always just absolutely covered in the substance they use. Sometimes they will be obvious. You could see them with the naked eye, like right here's another example. So you can see these are really, really difficult to pick apart. Now, there are a few things you can do to try to get rid of the egg masses. I know Vince and other people in DNR are going to be hosting different egg scraping events to help you identify them and learn what you can do to try to get rid of them. But locating these things can be a real challenge. So that means that this insect represents a particular kind of challenge to us. Unfortunately, it means that we're probably not going to be able to eradicate it very well. Most likely, we're going to just be slowing it down as best we can. But that's why it's so good that all of you are here tonight listening to me, because that means you're learning and you're going to be able to tell people about what you've learned tonight. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the feeding habits of this insect. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good news here. A lot of our invaders may have particular foods that they want to eat, but like I said, spotted lanternfly is a generalist. Now, what you are looking at right now is a spotted lanternfly, I think it's a nymph, that's feeding, and it has its mouth parts in whatever woody substrate that it's got it in. Important thing to remember about insects like this that tend to feed on trees, like a cicada or an aphid, they're a lot like cattle. They're going to stay in their same spot for a while, feeding on the tree. And whenever you see one that's feeding, that you could see the mouth parts going into the tree, but there's actually a lot more that it's inserting further into the tissue of the tree. If you happen to brush a spotted lanternfly off of a tree while feeding, you've most likely killed it because they can't withdraw their mouth parts very quickly. So when you do that, you've actually separated the mouth parts from the insect at that point, and they're most likely going to die. So don't think that just brushing them off isn't worth your time. That will actually help get rid of them. Now, like I said, their feeding is going to closely resemble that of an aphid or a cicada. They're going to be very, very still. They're going to stay on their feeding substrate for a long period of time while they drink their fill. I learned from a presentation done by some extension educators in Pennsylvania that this insect relies a lot on turgor pressure within the tree. So essentially, they aren't really draining and sucking up the fluid. They're relying on the pressure of the fluid in the tree to push into their body with a little help from them. So they're very, very lazy feeders in that regard. However, they have a very, very broad host range. Now, success will get different mileage on different plants, but unfortunately, we have enough evidence to see that they can still be successful even off of the primary host they have, the tree of heaven. And there's just another image. I'm not sure what I put that one in there for. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some individual plants that this insect eats. So grape is going to be one of major concern. Spotted lanternfly will do a lot of damage to trees. It will reduce their health significantly, but it will outright kill grape plants through heavy infestation. River birch is going to be another plant that this insect will very readily feed on, as well as our maples. And this can mean some bad news for our maple syrup producers here in Indiana. I actually live in close proximity to several who I'm planning on talking to about this subject. We have a couple other trees here. I cannot recall off the top of my head which one this is. I apologize. But we also have tree of heaven. This is going to be their primary host. This is the one that they will be the most successful on. And then roses as well. Now, a few of you probably know I like to grow roses at my house. I'm kind of despairing at this one, but hopefully my roses will get through this. And at least 100 more host plants. So that is a very, very large host range to try to deal with. That is not good news. It can be a real challenge to control an insect that has that many plants that it can adapt to. Now, the thing is that they won't always be able to reproduce on some of these trees. They're going to be more successful on different plants compared to others. They're going to be able to survive better on other plants as compared to some. Oh, and I just remembered that's a black walnut. I apologize. I should have remembered that. But we do know they're going to be the most successful on tree of heaven. That's going to be the most important one. See, Patty is asking, are they also going after native grapes? I believe they are. And then I've got another message here. What about vegetable plants? I don't have information on whether or not they're going to go after vegetable plants. That's something that I'm going to be looking at further. Now, we are expecting, let's see, Vince, you've already got that one answered. Thank you. And then we do have someone asking, do they bite or sting? Can they get into homes? No, these insects, that's one thing that is a bonus about these insects, is that they do not bite us. They are entirely herbivorous. They are not going to bite us. They don't have the ability to sting. They don't have stingers at all. And they won't get into pantries or anything like that. They're not a stored product feeder. They need a living, probably woody plant to be able to feed and be successful on. So you don't have to worry about them just suddenly eating everything in your home. You may have to deal with some of them buzzing into your home, but we were already dealing with cicadas in that regard. They're not really introducing anything that we haven't already been dealing with beforehand. So I'm going to keep rolling here. All right, so a little bit about their movement patterns. This is going to be kind of important as we determine how we're going to manage this insect. Now, spotted lanternfly has a tendency to hit the same, quote, hot trees year after year. This is more of that kind of lazy feeding behavior. If the adults can figure out that they're going to be successful on one tree, that means they're going to lay their eggs on that tree to provide their young the spot where they know their young will be successful, which means they're going to reinfest the same trees year after year. Now, you're going to find the nymphs feeding on shoots, which makes sense because the smaller insect is going for the more tender plant tissue. whereas the adult is going to prefer the trunk. This also creates a situation where the adults aren't taking food supplies away from the young too, so they're trying to guarantee a better success for their young. They are going to move the furthest as adults. While the adults are not good flyers, they still can fly, which means they can land on cars and other things. Vince gave us a great example of what happened in Switzerland County when some of them hitched a ride with someone who moved. Now, that means, though, that the nymphs, they can't go very far. When you're the size of one of these nymphs and your world is a leaf, the next leaf over is like 100 miles away for you. So you're not going to be moving a whole lot. Now, we do have some evidence that their feeding choices are going to vary as we move throughout the season, too. And I've got this great graph right here that Penn State Extension put out. So as you can see in the earlier portions of the season, starting in May, we know that they go for rose, grape, tree of heaven, and then when they hit June, they'll start in on black walnuts. As they move through the year, they're going to go ahead and leave rose alone. They're only going to feed on black walnut during the hotter parts of the summer. And then they're going to switch over to river birch, willow, sumac, and maple as we go further and further into fall. But the important thing to note here is that grape and tree of heaven have no exceptions. They will feed on those as long as they exist throughout their entire life cycle during the year. Also, it's important to note that these insects are what are called univoltine. They only have one generation within a year. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about tree of heaven, and there are some things that I want to make sure that all of you understand about this too. So tree of heaven is another invasive species. We don't want it here. It is very widespread, and if you have ever dealt with a tree of heaven infestation, you know really well that this plant is just a disaster waiting to happen. They are incredibly difficult to remove. It takes a lot of work to get rid of a really bad infestation, if you can get rid of it, because that is just a lot of backbreaking labor. Now, this tree is actually strongly preferred by spotted lanternfly because it is their primary host in their native range. That's good. That means they're going to attack this plant. They're going to, however, the spotted lanternfly is going to experience higher reproductive success on tree of heaven as compared to other hosts. That's bad. So some of us may look at this and go, well, hey, it's attacking tree of heaven. That's great. It'll help us get rid of it. But the trouble is spotted lanternfly is going to reproduce more on that. So no matter what, I want all of you to say, well, we need to get rid of both. We can eliminate the tree of heaven as much as we can. We can reduce the better reproductive substrate for these insects and try to control both at the same time. Don't leave your tree of heaven there if you can. So a little bit about the damage of this insect. I already mentioned some of it, but let's go a little further in. So we have a certain amount of impact on woody plants, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to kill woody plants. The plants are going to show signs of stress. They're going to lose their ability to store nutrients as efficiently. If the plants are weaker or younger, they could reduce growth or potentially kill them. But if you have most adult plants, the spotted lanternfly is just going to reduce its health over time. Now, the trouble with that is that it's going to make those plant tissues much more susceptible to disease. When they feed, they're making wounds in the plant surface, which means that fungal diseases and bacterial diseases can very easily get in. Now, we don't have any evidence yet that spotted lanternfly transfers any particular pathogens to plants. Vince, if you've heard anything different, please throw it in the chat. But they're still going to make the plant weak to it. So that's bad overall. They could make an impact on the plant's ability to regulate seasonally, so their ability to go into their seasonal diapause and go dormant and then come back out of it. If they don't have as much energy, think of a bear going into hibernation. That bear gets real fat. They need that fat to be able to survive the winter, and if they don't have it, they won't live. Well, the same is going to be true for the plants that these insects are going to be feeding on. They might survive the winter, but they're not going to be coming out of it better. Now here's the really bad news. Spotted lanternfly can kill certain plants, particularly grapes. We don't know the impact on fruit trees yet. It could be a toss-up either way. But no matter what crop they're feeding on, spotted lanternfly is going to produce honeydew. A lot of us have already dealt with this as a challenge with aphids, like oak aphid if you have a lot of oak trees around you, or aphids in your garden. What happens is that this insect, as it feeds on sap within a tree, that sap is extremely rich in sugar. And the body of a spotted lanternfly can't possibly process all that sugar. So what they do is they excrete it. And that excretion is what we call honeydew. Unfortunately, when you have a very bad spotted lanternfly infestation, they essentially rain honeydew down as they feed, and it is very, very nasty. There are some crops that they're going to feed on, they'll prefer less. So hopefully the honeydew production around those areas will be less challenging to deal with. But one of the things we did learn is that spraying for insects did have to increase in areas where we were dealing with spotted lanternfly. It is noted too, and this is research being done by some other folks here, not mine, but some researchers have noticed that they do tend to prefer field edges, which matches up with being an invasive species, as many of them do like to live around edge habitats, and they can transition across habitats very easily. So a little on that honeydew, or what I'm going to refer to as indirect damage. What you're seeing here is an image of honeydew covering a plant, and you can see obviously it is impacting that plant's health. When honeydew lands on a surface, since it's so rich in sugar, it's going to allow for the development of sooty mold, which can very badly impact the health of a plant. Now, I kind of went over all this, I got a little ahead of myself. That honeydew is going to form that mold substrate, and it's going to kind of form this blackened area over plants. A couple weeks ago, again, when I was working with Vince, he brought in several branches of Tree of Heaven, and you could very clearly see the honeydew covering those branches and how it had turned them black from the sooty mold development on them. Now, a little bit on management. One of the things that I'm going to preface this with is if you feel like you need to spray for spotted lanternfly, if you get an infestation of it, contact your local extension educator if you are in Indiana. They are trained specifically to be able to help you figure out the best pesticides to be able to spray for spotted lanternfly and other insects. There are several that exist that have been shown to be effective. Dinotefuran, I believe, has been one that's particularly effective against spotted lanternfly. And again, Vince, I know you've dealt a lot with spraying for this insect, so please feel free to throw any information you have into the chat if you want to share that. Now, the chemical treatments for this are fairly effective. You can do sprays, you can do direct injections, placing a systemic insecticide into a plant or putting in a soil drench to get the same effect. One thing I will say though, pesticides have no friends. They will not discriminate. If there is an insect that it lives around that tree or feeds on that tree, they will be affected as well. So we need to use them judiciously. Potential issues that we have to deal with here is that spotted lanternfly will reinfest. They will just come right back the next season. So you're going to have to be doing this year after year. And if we keep spraying for them, the insects are eventually going to develop resistance against the pesticides we use. And then just the number of dead insects can be another problem too. Infestations can get very, very heavy, and we can get lots and lots of dead insects that you don't want to leave on the ground. You're going to want to get those up and get rid of them however you can. Now, here are some control tactics that are going to be things you can consider doing throughout a year once you have an infestation. Hopefully you never have to deal with this though. You can scrape eggs off of trees, off of the trunks of trees and on the branches, January to April. Now, the bad part about this is that spotted lanternflies tend to lay their eggs higher up in trees. So you'll only be able to reach so many of those egg masses. This doesn't mean that it's a waste of your time. You just need to be aware that it's not going to be the perfect solution. You can spray horticultural oils on the eggs from February to April. And then you can also put up sticky traps May through October to try to control them. I tend to think of this better as monitoring, because the sticky traps, they're going to catch whatever flies through them. Now you can put certain kinds of meshes over them to limit what's caught, but it's a little broad spectrum in my opinion. I think sticky traps are going to be good to help you monitor your numbers rather than be a full control tactic. Contact insecticides and systemic insecticides are going to be things you can use from May to October, the soil drench there from April to September, and then any tree trunk spraying or tree injections that you want to do is going to be best done from July until the end of September. Now I see Sue, you're asking, what is the correct way to dispose of the dead ones? You want to make sure that any dead insects you pick up, put into a trash bag, and make sure that nothing ever comes out of that trash bag. You should be able to safely throw them away into a landfill after that point, because the dead ones aren't going to be laying any more eggs. They're not going to have young hatch out of them or anything like that. The bigger concern is if you choose to remove the eggs from the trees. What we recommend for that is you could scrape the eggs off of the trees using something like a credit card, like an old credit card or something maybe you got in the mail. We also have scraping cards that you can get from Purdue University or talk to your local extension office about them. And what you do there is you take the card and you smash the eggs against the tree to try to crush them. And it's going to be nasty. They're going to pop and they're going to have kind of an ooze because you just broke a bunch of eggs. And then you scrape them into something like a Ziploc bag with some alcohol solution or something similar. That way you can be sure that the eggs are dead. Don't try to just scrape the eggs off into a garbage bag and throw them away. You want to make sure you get them in like a solution of soapy water or alcohol or something similar. Now, there are a few biocontrol options that are being looked at right now. Bavaria bassiana is one that I'm familiar with. I used to watch it, get some research done on it when I was a grad student. These biocontrol options are referred to as entomopathogenic fungi or viruses. So there is some positive results with them. I think these are still fairly deep in the research stage of this, but what you're looking at here is an insect that has been infected by probably Bavaria. And that's that white powdery substance you see all over its body. You've probably seen lots of like Discovery Channel documentaries or something talking about the zombie ant and the fungus that covers that ant. Well, this is similar, just it doesn't control it to make it move or anything. It just infests the insect and eventually kills it. The results do look promising, but we're going to hold out for more research in the future to see where this goes. Now, a little bit on tree of heaven removal. This is one that we need everybody to help out with. Tree of heaven is best removed when they are young. Identify them early, get rid of them early. If the trees grow large, removing them can be a serious challenge, and sometimes it may not be successful. You want to use caution when you do so. There is a little bit of toxicity to tree of heaven. Make sure you are using protective gloves and other things, as it does have, I believe it's more allergens that are the major issue with tree of heaven. Some people are wondering if we can treat tree of heaven as a trap tree for spotted lanternfly. I'm not sure that's something that I personally agree with at the moment. I think it's going to be best to eliminate the tree of heaven to reduce the available space for the spotted lanternfly. And on top of that, tree of heaven represents an invasive plant that is just already a nightmare. So it's going to be best, in my opinion, to get rid of them whenever we find them. That way, we'll also eliminate substrate for the spotted lanternfly as well. So what can you do? How can you help out with this one? Obviously, remove that tree of heaven right now. Get rid of it if you know you have it. And report, please report sightings of spotted lanternfly. Report something you think is spotted lanternfly, even if you're not sure. You can report it by going to these websites. edmaps.org is one website, as well as glidden.org. So Glidden is the Great Lakes Early Detection Network. I almost forgot that for a moment. EdMaps is a tool that a lot of us use to map out invasive species spread. You can also call 1-866-NO-EXOTIC. That is a phone number that I and other people monitor to get reports of invasive species. You can always call that number. It's easy to remember. And you can email us. Feel free to email me anytime to be able to get information about spotted lanternfly, or just to tell me, hey, I think I saw one. You can send me a picture, whatever. I will take a look at it. When you do report this, what we want you to do is write down when you saw it, where you were when you saw it, take a picture of it so that way we can see what you were looking at, and potentially collect a sample if you can. If you feel comfortable handling an insect, grab it, put it in a container, put it in your freezer for several days. That's the best way to kill them. And then you can always bring it to like your local extension office. I guarantee you they will contact me to help get that identified. And then just stay generally aware. We can't do our work without your help. We can't spread awareness of this insect without all of you talking about it as well. One thing I wanted to highlight here is that you can use the Purdue Plant Doctor to help figure out not only this insect, but the other invasive species. You can find it at www.plantdoctor.com. It also has an app you can download as well, or you can go to the website on your phone as well. I tested them out and they both work fairly well. And then we also, here's some other information. We do have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can always post questions or pictures on ours. It's all under the Report Invasive handle. So reportinvasive.com is our website, and then you can find Report Invasive at each of those social medias. You can also subscribe to the Purdue Landscape Report. We will get a lot of this information on this insect and other plants, as well as other things from the Emerald Ash Borer University and Penn State Extension, who do a lot of work on this topic. All right, that is what I have for you all. So